Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our Ed Leadership Sims webinar today with our partner K20 Connect. Today we're going to be discussing the CARES Act and other professional development funding vehicles. I'm going to go to the next slide here, and you'll see that on the left-hand side, you'll be able to ask questions via the GoToWebinar panel by either raising your hand or utilizing the questions button to chat. And I'll be monitoring those questions so that we can make sure to get to as many as possible. And anything we don't get to during this webinar, we will be sure to answer and send out along with the recording of this webinar. Before I turn it over to our K20 partners, Dr. Keisha Ray and Susan Gens, I'd like to just run a quick poll. So I'll leave it up for a few seconds here, and you can respond to the best of your ability, and then I'll share the results. So hopefully you guys can see the poll. Sorry, coming. So if you can respond to the best of your ability. All right, we'll go ahead and close that poll here. We have about 80% responding. Give you a few more seconds. All right, so I'll share the results. And hopefully you can see that we're a little bit split between, yes, PD services may look different next school year versus a lot of unsure responses as well, which is what we anticipated. So with that, I will turn over the webinar to our K20 Connect team, starting with Susan Gens.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. That is a very interesting poll, and hopefully you'll be learning a lot from us today about what things might look like coming in the fall. So I'm Susan Gens. A little bit about me. I have a policy background. I was working in the United States Senate when the Every Student Succeeds Act went through. So I started to learn the law very well and started to understand a lot about how DC works, and especially when it comes to these stimulus funds. So I'm going to talk to you today about what's going on in DC, which, as you all know, it's a lot. So I'm going to try to make it fun and exciting, and also something that's very helpful to you as you consider how to leverage these funds moving forward, and especially when it comes to professional development for your educators and leaders. So just to start off, we have the CARES Act, which by now I'm sure you've heard of. But there's a lot of different funds within the CARES Act that we want to go through and make sure that you understand the requirements on them, as well as how much is actually in the fund. So specifically, there is a stabilization fund, which is formula based on Title I, and there's $13.5 billion allocated to that fund, specifically for K-12. And within it, it's called the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. And it's something that's very wide open. Districts have a lot of say on how it's used once they get there. So we'll talk a little bit about the application process, because it's also different from more of the title funding that you've already received. But just also to add quickly, there's also a $3 billion fund called the GEER Fund, which is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And even after the CARES Act was passed, the Department of Ed has been announcing other types of grants and funds that are available, including $180 million for microgrants, and specifically Rethinking K-12 and Continuing to Learn grants. Those operate a little bit differently. They're not formula funds like the stabilization fund is. So that's something that you have to competitively submit an application for. And then we also have now introduced a student-centered funding pilot, which is a fund that was actually authorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act, but has now finally gotten an allocation because of coronavirus. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too, but those are really the main funds right now that K-12 has to help mitigate some of the losses that are happening due to COVID-19. So I'm gonna go back to the ESSER process and the application. So there's a lot of strings when it comes to federal funds, as you all know. And what's really interesting about the stabilization fund is that the goal was really just to get funds out quickly. And so this means that the application looks a lot different than many of the other funds. It's designed to be streamlined and quick, just so that the USDE can get those funds out. And some of you might have them already. Each state is doing things a little differently. But as I mentioned, they're based off that Title I formula. And Secretary DeVos stated when she put the application out that her department did not want to micromanage the funds, but wanted to encourage districts to really take the opportunity to rethink the way students and educators access education. So the use of these funds is wide open, as I mentioned, to allow districts to decide how best to use the money on the biggest needs. And this goes for public, non-public. There's ways to allocate the money, and Keisha will talk about some of those relationships and what that looks like, but it's open for K-12. It's general. So then the GEER fund, which is the governor's fund that I mentioned, specifically is supposed to provide emergency support. So these are grants that are going to LEAs. Again, most districts probably have them. If not, the state has them and are getting ready to allocate. They have to evaluate which districts they think are in the most need for these funds. And so it's to continue to provide educational services, both to public and non-public school students, and support ongoing functionality of the district. So that's another area where districts are seeing some funds coming in that, again, are not really dictated how they need to be spent. It's really a needs base. If you need to spend the money on your hotspots, if you need to get students connected, if it's technology, if it's professional development, whatever the highest need is, the district is allowed to gauge that and to make the best decision that they can for their highest priorities. So then we also have these microgrants, and these are brand new. And the latest round of this funding happened just a couple weeks ago. So here's what we know so far. There's an estimated range of what the awards will be. They estimate somewhere from 5 million to 20 million, thinking the average is somewhere around 15 million. We also think that the department will give out 13 to 14 awards with 4 awards under each category. And this is the part that gets a little confusing, but they're based with preference to the states with the highest coronavirus burden. And so again, that's really, really vague, but we have heard that that probably means that the virus burden for the evaluation accounts for 40% of the points. So these will be the states that have really seen a lot of cases, a lot of hospitalizations, deaths, everything from this virus. So again, we don't know a lot what that looks like. We know that it'll be competitive and that essentially it could act like a voucher where either individual educators or individual families actually receive money from these microgrants. That's still being sorted out a little bit, but there's a lot of speculation happening. So keep an eye out on that, because that could be really helpful for especially educators who are learning how to teach online or going remote. There's a lot of opportunity for that there. And finally, just this week, Secretary DeVos announced that student-centered funding pilot That one will have a $3 million grant, and it will give school districts the opportunity to launch student-centered funding programs. Again, it was authorized under ESSA, but there was no money ever allocated to it until now. And so the idea is that that a local entity can enter into demonstration agreements with LEAs, and then the agencies can consolidate eligible federal education funds with state and local funds to develop this student-centered funding system. So there's a real opportunity to think about new learning models and delivery, and again, new professional development models along that. So that's another one. Again, we'll keep you updated. There's a lot of things happening. And then specifically for non-public schools, there's opportunities that are within the CARES Act as well. And non-public schools are eligible for the K-12 parts of the program and the governor's fund if the public school district receives a grant. So we have that option for non-public, and then the Keeping American Workers Employed and Paid Small Business Loans got $350 billion, and that is specifically for nonprofits that include faith-based schools and other opportunities within that fund as well. There has been a little bit of a contentious conversation between the interpretation of what Congress wrote and what the department has interpreted for public and non-public schools. So it's not super contentious. It's just a difference of interpretation where there's many superintendents who are saying when a school district receives federal funding for poor students, you have to do equitable services. There's, such as transportation and tutoring for low-income students that attend private schools within the district. And then there's another side of things that are saying, well, instead of the funding being based on how many low-income students private schools have, the allocation method was changed to base funds off of the total percentage of students. So there's clearly clearly two different interpretations that are happening, and it will be up to really the public district and the independent and non-public schools to really work that out. So with that, we're going to now move on to waivers. So there's a lot of funding opportunities, but more than funding is waivers, which allow a ton of flexibility in how these funds that you already have can be used and carry over. So the first one is a waiver from Title I Part A, which is the 15% carryover. That is no longer in place. You can carry over all the funds that you still currently have, which is huge when you think about what's left of the budget and how to fill some of the holes that might be coming. And then we also have a lot of waivers out of Title IV Part A of ESSA, which is where we find all of the technology dollars, access to a well-rounded education, and supporting safe and healthy students. And under there used to be, well, there is a provision in ESSA that says if you get $30,000 or more, you have to do a needs assessment. That is waived. There's no restrictions on technology. Under ESSA, they say that you must spend only 15% on devices and other technology. That cap is lifted. It's really so that you can support all the needs. And then something else that is really different is the definition of professional development is waived. So this means that you can do some kind of out-of-the-box thinking when it comes to professional development. This definition might otherwise limit the ability to quickly train school leaders and teachers on topics like effective distance learning techniques. So as you can see, all of those waivers come into play with the new funds that are available. And it's so important to strategically think about how to use those all together and make sure that you can leverage those funds in the best way possible. And I just wanted to say a quick note on the HEROES Act. This is the House's, quote, phase 4 stimulus bill. It's likely not going anywhere in the Senate, so we shouldn't get too attached to it. But I did want to mention that we had a lot of advocacy efforts up on the Hill trying to get more of these funds to help with districts as they transition to more of a remote blended learning model. And specifically in the HEROES Act, there's 58 billion that would go to K-12 schools in this bill. It's about a third of the amount of what advocates were requesting in the last couple of weeks. But it's still, more funds that could be coming to think about. And there's an estimate now that we've seen come out of the federal government that over the next several years, we think there's going to be about a $650 billion shortfall from state budgets. So there's a lot of advocacy work going on around that too. So again, that bill is not really likely to pass, but the Senate is likely to consider something within the next month or so. It will just be interesting to see what that looks like once the Senate gets a hold of it. So with these funds and waivers, it's critical to think about the holistic approach, as I mentioned, and I am going to pass it off to Dr. Keisha Ray, who is an expert on providing excellent professional development and making sure that districts really can think through holistic approaches.
Thank you, Susan, and hello, everybody. Thanks so much for spending the afternoon with us today. A little bit about my background beyond the bullets at the beginning of the presentation. I was an assistant superintendent in a large urban school district and was responsible for all of the technology in the district and also all of the federal programs in the district. And that ranged all the way from E-rate to all of the titles to IDEA. So the full gamut of federal programs and the full gamut of technology were under my purview in that district. And we did a lot of really great stuff and a lot of innovative change that was well documented. And actually, we had the president and secretary of education multiple times come and talk about the great things that we were doing. So I want to talk about carryover because that was one of my strategies when I was in charge of federal funds. And if I were still in charge of them today, it's absolutely one I would take advantage of. One thing that sometimes happens in schools and districts is we think in silos instead of kind of across all programs. And the thinking for this carryover should be across all of your programs and also in relationship to your operational, your capital, and your other budgets that you might have, even your foundation partners or, kind of external partners that contribute to your budget. So think about the carryover that you have and the monies that you have and the ways that you can bundle that as you are developing your plan moving forward. A lot of districts are thinking about the reentry next year and what that's going to look like. Many districts I consult with New York and LA, and each of those districts are thinking about how we create a continuum of learning that allows students to work from home and from school. And absolutely maximizing the budgeting process as we're planning for that is something that we're doing in each of those districts, and you can do in your districts and schools too. So think about all the planning that you're doing for next year and how you're going to open school and all the things that are going to be required around opening school and the different ways that you're going to have to approach custodial care, that you're going to have to approach security, that you're going to have to approach teacher training, that you're going to have to approach student health and wellness and student social emotional behaviors, teacher social emotional. And then once you have your plan, look at your pots of money and say, this can be used for this. Title IV can be used for social emotional well-being. Title II can be used for professional development. Title III can be used for our EL populations and finding the great things that we need to do for their populations to transition between remote and at-home learning, or online and at-home learning, or school learning. So think about it very, very holistically when you're doing your planning, but lead with your plan. Don't lead with your budget. Lead with your plan and what your needs are, and then design your budget in such a way that it supports your plan. Don't forget any kind of bonds or other grants that you could go after for connectivity. There's some RUS grants out there. There's QZAB bonds. There's a lot of opportunities around E-rate, and there's a lot of accessibility opportunities in the monies that Susan just talked through. So think about how you're going to acquire devices if you don't have any, how you're going to acquire any kind of hotspots or connectivity, and then what pots of money you can benefit from the most in getting those items funded. Another thing that's important to think about, not really related to your budget, but related to timeline, is because of the pandemic and because of especially the shutdown in a lot of economies worldwide, inventory is very, very low in a lot of companies. So when you think about the devices that you might need or the hotspots that you might need, give yourself a long window. If you need stuff in August, you need to be ordering it really in June so that you can have it by August. No, hardly anybody has inventory right now. Very few companies do at scale. And so you want to make sure that you get your order in so that you have what you need in time for start of school. Another thing that you want to think about is your professional development. And when we think about professional development, we need to think about, this is an opportunity to grow your leaders in your organization and to build a pipeline of innovative leaders. You're going to have a lot of really excited, motivated teacher leaders, coaches, assistant principals that are going to get this. They're going to really get this way of teaching. They're going to see through things that nobody else can see through, and you want to be able to uplift them and move them through the pipeline, so to speak, so that they can become a future leader in your district, and maybe faster than even they anticipated. So think about your professional development dollars in the form not only of resources that you're going to make available, or programs that you're going to design, or systems you're going to build, but think about it in the pipeline too, and what you're going to do to advance teachers into coach positions, into principal positions, into district positions, etc. Another area to think about is really the complexity of everyone's life right now in lockdown. Even though we're open to being able to go out in some states, not every state is open, and there's still a hesitancy and a great amount of fear to really be out and exposed in society. So be sensitive and respectful of that when you're thinking about the professional development for your teachers. I was talking to a district leader yesterday who's having to go ahead and report back in her building, and she's a nervous wreck about having to do that. She knows she has to do it, but to keep her job, but she's really nervous about it. So be sensitive to the social emotional well-being of your principals, of your teachers, and really of everybody in the district, quite frankly, your parents, everybody. Think about also parent development in this new normal too. There are monies that can be spent out of Title I on supporting parents. you need to take advantage of those monies and use them in a way you've probably never thought to use them before, and really build up resources around parents and what parents need to know and be able to do in order to support the learning at home. Another kind of aspect that you probably need to consider is how comfortable all of your staff are with working in online and remote environments, and provide some effective practices for them, and quite frankly provide some again, some social emotional support for them. With my work in LA, a phenomenal school district who, when we kicked off the whole professional development, we incorporated a social emotional learning specialist in that professional development, so that at the same time we were talking about academics and the technology, we also had somebody in there talking about social emotional well-being of everybody. So a very holistic approach to designing professional development. Another aspect that everybody worldwide is having to think about is how you incorporate the online component of that, and how you make sure that you have the necessary online tools and online resources and online learning platforms. All of these funds can be used in a variety of ways to build all of that. You can cobble together, E-rate, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV to build that wonderful ecosystem that can support a blended learning environment for you, if that's what you choose to do in order to re-enter school next year. So think about kind of what your school design is going to be, lead with that, make sure that you're cognizant of the social emotional well-being of your teachers and your staffs, along with your students, of course, and families. And another final thing that you need to probably consider is the support you provide to your special education populations. Medicaid did and Medicare did have some amendments through the whole CARES Act piece around telemedicine, and you can get reimbursed through Medicaid for telemedicine services. So make sure that you're capitalizing on that and building that into your plan. You can actually, many of us are going to have shortfalls because the economy has kind of taken a hit. Not kind of, it's had a hit. And think about what your budget, your future budgets are going to look like, and how you can be really smart about your spending and smart about your supportive services, and other resources that you might be providing that could move into a virtual environment and cost less money. And you can certainly take advantage of the stimulus money, but that's also something you can sustain over time when your budgets reset themselves. So bottom line, think very holistically about your planning. Lead with your planning. Don't lead with how much money you have here and there. Lead with what you need, and then build your budget around that, taking advantage of the carryover, taking advantage of your spends. Spend down your operation to the degree that you can, and move your carryover into future year, because you really don't know what future year is going to hold, with the economy the way it is, and with all of the governments having to kind of struggle to keep their budgets together. And since we're all locally funded, predominantly, that's a key piece to keep in mind. And for those of you who are private schools, of course, take advantage of the partnership with the districts to get access to these funds. Take advantage of the fact that you are entitled to have access to the funds that are coming down through the states, and have a conversation and try to get those agreements in place so that you can provide your parent support and have access to these funds for your programs as well. I really have enjoyed spending my time with you today, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time there. We do have one question, which I'm trying to pull up here. Sorry. Yeah, the question was around, it was for independent school, and the understanding that these funds are not only, I think you just answered this, not only for public schools. Title I funds and other funds are not only for public schools, but they're also available for non-public schools as well, right?
Mhm.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. You need to talk to, they'll flow through the public school district. So you need to engage with them and create a partnership with them. And there's a form that you'll have to fill out for them to gain access to it, but they're absolutely available to you.
Okay. Do we have to go with those three categories, or can we choose from other categories provided for by the CARES Act?
Categories as in the funds that we specifically mentioned?
Yeah, so the understanding is that the CARES funding is for all students, not just low-income students. I'm a
Yes.
private school principal. Also, our district chose 3 areas that we could choose from. That was their priority from the categories included in the CARES Act.
Oh,
Do we
yeah.
have to go with those 3 categories, or can we choose from all categories provided by the CARES Act?
Go ahead, Keisha.
Yeah, you'll have to go with what the district submitted. The key to that is being in on those conversations when the district's developing their plan. So when I was superintendent of federal programs, we had meetings with our private schools, and we, in those meetings, would determine kind of how to complete the application. Those meetings should be occurring, if they haven't already occurred, in your area. And if you've been actively engaged with your district in receiving those federal funds, then you should have been part of those meetings. So my recommendation would be to reach out to the federal programs director in your school district to see what that process is to gain access to the funds. They may not, they may say, no, you could do something different, but it's probably going to be within the pots that the district and the private schools have already kind of mapped out and agreed on.
Okay, just one more point of clarification. This money is not just for low-income students only, correct?
No.
Not the CARES Act money. Your carryover from last year will be.
The CARES Act money is just allocated based on the Title I formula, but it's can be used district-wide.
Okay. We have another question here. I am from a private school. Do we access from one town where our school is located, or from each town that students come from, like we do for Title I?
Like you do for Title I.
Okay. Is there a place in all this for partnerships with universities, especially those that focus on teacher professional development?
I mean, yeah, you can take advantage of them for your professional development partner. That's what I'm doing. We're doing that in a school district I'm working in. They have a really robust university system that has a great teacher ed program. And we're actually using some of the professional development monies to pay the university to train the teachers because, quite frankly, everybody's exhausted. And so the universities have kind of been on, not hiatus, but they haven't been running and gunning like the school district has, because they kind of let their kids go home. This particular university did. They just closed down school and let everybody go home and clear everything out. School district still had to keep running until last week. That district closed last week. So definitely engage in a partnership and definitely think about how you can use them for professional development.
And even in the ESSER application, you're allowed to list partners that you're going to use to create these resources that you need, or the SEA might even require you to list partners. So you can definitely do institutions of higher education, and higher ed also got money too. So there's opportunities to help each other out. And a lot of times it's easy to look at these funds like, oh, they're split into 2 big buckets, higher ed and K-12, but there can be overlap, believe it or not. It's okay.
In Mississippi, just to give you an example, in Mississippi, all of the beauty colleges got money, like a lot of money. And they have some high schools in Mississippi that run an academy model, which is career academies within the school. And they partnered with the beauty colleges to upgrade some of their classrooms. They're partnering to upgrade some of their classrooms so they can offer beauty college classes in the high school. And that's a wonderful way to maximize those funds. So this is the time to think out of the box. This is the time to get creative. And this is the time to not waste the crisis. Everybody got a lot of money. Don't just use the money the way that you've always used the money. Think differently about how you can apply this, and think in a way that you can sustain it over time. Try not to do something rash like, let's just buy a whole lot of technology that in 3 years, when it goes bad, we have no way of replacing because we don't have this money in the future. Think of how you can be smart to invest this money in such a way that you can sustain it over time.
Okay, we have another one here. As a private school, is the only way to access the funds through our public school district?
Yeah, since they'll be allocated through Title I, that those funds flow directly from federal to state to district, and then you have those local conversations.
Okay, and one of our attendees would like to verify that it is based on 2019-2020 enrollments, FTE, for the LEA.
Yeah, it's the most recent one. And actually, I live in Iowa where there were apparently our 2019 numbers were not, something was calculated differently. So our state was arguing for 2018 and lost. So yeah, it's completely based on the last year for that formula funding.
That's probably going to be your 20-day count of this school year, of this past school year.
And also something that I didn't mention that is important is these stimulus funds, you have until September of 2022 to spend them. And so as Keisha was talking about how to strategically spend down your funds, use the ones that you'd have to give back sooner if you don't use them. It 100% makes sense to use those funds that are going to go away first. And these stimulus funds, you have a while. So don't be scared if they're kind of sitting there for a minute while you're thinking things through, because you have a couple years to use those before you would have to give anything back.
It looks like we have one more question, and then someone has their hand raised, so we can go to that person in a minute. Can funding be used to help teachers finish credential programs or master programs?
That hasn't really been clarified. There's not that many assurances required, and so at the very least, you could submit something like that to the SEA and see if they approve it or not. But a lot of the assurances that are in the ESSER application specifically are, the state may require the district to do X, Y, and Z, but nothing is really, the state is required. So whenever the word may is in there, as Keisha said, think outside the box. If that's something that is really high priority for your district, try it. And if they say no, then you'll know the answer to that. But I think that that will vary from state to state too on what the SEA approves as a use for those funds. So reach out to your state department and ask. You can do that before you even try to apply as well.
But before you reach out, think strategically about what that question is going to be. If you have, let's say you're a private school and you have a partnership with your school district and they've said you can use professional development funds to grow leadership. And one of the things that you want to do to enhance or grow your leadership is you've got a fabulous teacher that you need to get credentialed to move into a principal position. Then you have a really good case for making sure that that teacher gets the master's so that they can move into the position, and take that really good case to the State Department. I wouldn't take a random question. I would take a scenario. My experience in the many times I've done that is A random question may or may not get the answer you want, but a scenario helps them really visualize what you're trying to accomplish. And then you're more more likely to get a yes than if you just ask this kind of wondering if I could do this. Unless it really is a wondering and you have no clue what you really want to do with it.
We have a couple more that just came in. Sorry if I missed this. When do public schools have to submit the application? And is there a deadline for private schools to notify them of their intent to participate?
So there's no deadline for schools to submit an application. A lot of states have done, we will start accepting them as early as. So there are some states that are accepting those already, but it doesn't mean that you have to get it in that day. If you want to take your time to think about it, like I said, there's time to spend. So I hope if nothing else today, you've learned from us that we really want you to be very thoughtful as you think about what school is even going to look like in the fall, especially what that means for developing teachers and what that means for holistically planning. And then I'll let Keisha talk about the partnership with the district.
Well, if I'm a private school principal or headmaster of a cluster of private schools, I would reach out to the federal programs department in the school district and see what their process is. And I'd get in on that sooner rather than later. Like as soon as this webinar ends, I'd be sending an email to try to figure out what I need to do to secure my funds. If they say something like, well, you've never taken money, like you've never partnered with us before on Title I, I would say, but these are different times and this is a different stimulus package. So how can I get engaged? If the district pushes back, do what all of my former private schools did when I pushed back, go to the state and get clarification from the state, and then the state will route back to the person in charge of federal funds and make the correction. It could be that they're interpreting it a certain way. Stimulus is kind of a new thing. This is different than the stimulus that came out during Obama's administration, but all of this is kind of new to federal programs directors. And so they're typically going to answer with their tried and true, this is how we do things. And this is not meant to be how we normally do things. So I would say if they're not sure, then go to the state, see what they say you're supposed to do, and then engage the state in contacting the district on your behalf. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and the last round of stimulus came out over 10 years ago. And just think how much technology has even changed how we think about education and what we can offer students. So yeah, don't be afraid to figure out your needs and then be different because this is all new and you could get pushed back, but you might not. And so it doesn't hurt to, if this is really going to meet your needs, to try. This is the time where, I talk to people and I say there's a lot of times when we try to do different things in education, we're worried about that bad headline, about being the district that tried something and it was kind of a disaster. Well, everybody is in the same boat right now. And so now is the time to really be innovative and try and get new ideas or thoughts that you've been trying to get off the ground even for maybe the last 5 years. People are definitely more willing to consider new learning models and new ways of doing education even at this point.
Yep. We can offer everybody.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that everybody on this webinar can offer support to any district that needs it that's participating, I think. So you have a lot of friends on this webinar that can help you if you feel like you're not getting the right question answered.
So we have just a couple more here. Can non-public schools submit for reimbursement? If we had to upgrade technology for remote learning, can we receive reimbursement for purchases already?
So this is a state question. I know some states, like my state, retroactively will pay districts back from March 31st, I believe, for their purchases. And again, that would probably depend on the departmentship with the district if you're non-public. and what that looks like. But I know public schools, a lot of states are saying, look, we know you've already had to buy a lot to transfer to this more online learning environment, and they'll retroactively pay back. So that's definitely a discussion with who you're working with, but a possibility.
Okay, and also, when should non-public schools expect to hear from LEAs? She's reached out but hasn't heard back yet. Is there a deadline?
I would call them every single week until I got an answer. I would not be silent. They're probably trying to figure out what they're trying to do, what their plan is and what they're trying to do, especially if they're all still working remotely. But I would still reach out via email and contact them. And I would also reach out to the state department's federal program coordinator or director and try to get information there. I wouldn't not reach out. I wouldn't think, if I'm not hearing anything, nothing must be done. I would be like, a dripping water faucet. Hey, answer my email.
Yeah, and something else to think about too is, as we mentioned, the HEROES Act and what could be coming, a lot of that will depend on what's being done with the current funds now. So it's important for us as districts, as non-public schools, as anyone who's receiving this money, to make sure that those dollars are being used effectively and well, because that would give a signal to the Senate that, okay, we do need more. We know that they've been used well, they've been used effectively, and we still need more. So it's just, even in those conversations, like, yes, keep calling, because if you know that you're going to have, this is going to help our students, this is going to help, our credit recovery, whatever the issue is, don't be afraid to just keep pestering. I think that's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another question here. Our allocation is based on the number of students that qualify for free and reduced hot lunch. Is our allocation.
That's part of it. And I'm assuming this is a public school, so if not, let me know. But there are several variables within Title I, and it's definitely based on, there's poverty numbers in there, and which obviously would encompass free and reduced lunch, but it's a very, very complex formula that's more than that. And as someone who worked in the Senate, I tried to understand that formula, and I've got like an 80-page congressional research report if you would like to see what that looks like. It's very complex.
Okay, here's another one. I know you mentioned this earlier in the webinar, but my school district wants me to fill out a title grant form listing the number of Title I students I have to receive grant money. If I don't have any Title I students in my school, could the district refuse to submit my funding request?
I would have to get back to you on that unless Keisha knows. I'm not sure what that looks like.
No, I mean, under normal circumstances, the answer would be yes. But we're not in normal circumstances, so I would check with the state. That's probably your best avenue to get the right answer there. There should be someone at your state department that definitely is over federal programs, but there also should be a private school contact if you're a private school.
It is from a private school, the question.
Yeah, there should be somebody at the State Department that can field the private school questions.
Okay.
And I think that does go back to the conversation that's happening right now between what Congress wrote and how the department is interpreting it. So they might not even have a clear answer for you at this point either until the Department of Ed clarifies what the right interpretation is.
Okay, this is the last one as of now. I worked for a public school and now a private school. Public schools had to certify with Title I that they have reached out to the non-public. Do you know if that is a provision of this funding?
As far as I've seen, it's not. because it is so wide open. But I think that also goes back to the guidance coming from the Department of Ed. And so once that guidance is again clarified, since it's not an actual fund, it's not a waiver, it's actually the implementation piece of it. You know, this bill has only really been around a month. And so there's a lot of things that we're still learning every day in press releases. So that could be another question where you could reach out to your contacts to see how your state or district is addressing that.
Okay. We just had one more come in. Are the funds only for identified students, or can students not identified benefit too?
I'm not sure what identified students means.
Okay.
I think what is being asked is when you are submitting, if you're a private school and you submit to a public school for funds, it's a targeted assistance program. Typically, it's not school-wide, and you have to identify the students that you want to participate in the program.
Yeah,
I think the GEER Act, that's exempt. You can include everybody, but you still have to have that relationship with the district so that you can get access to those funds. So
yeah, yep, the funds are school-wide, district-wide, however your needs need to be met. And if you're non-public and you're just one school, that would be your school, obviously. But yeah, it's not for like the bottom 15% or whatever, like school improvement efforts or anything. It's for everybody.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. That's it for all the questions. I appreciate you guys answering all those. And thank you for everyone who attended. I will be sending the webinar, and I'll also send out the presentation as many of you have requested. You'll see on the screen here that we are hosting a free online professional development opportunity on June 11th. Dr. DeYoung will play one of our simulations, Equity Exploring Beneath the Surface, with some of your peers from around the country. You're welcome to invite anyone from your school or district to participate. We'll break into small groups at each decision point, and you guys can discuss, come to a decision, and we'll reconvene as a larger group. It should be a very exciting and engaging opportunity. So you will be receiving some information about that as well. But again, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you so much, Dr. Ray and Susan, for spending time with us and answering all our questions. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.